On December 14, 1950, 31 miners descended into the Brackenridge Coal Mine in Hazelton, Pennsylvania, for the night shift. None of them ever came back up. The official report stated that a catastrophic cave-in at 11:47 p.m. killed all the men instantly. The company paid generous settlements to the families, double the standard rate, with one condition: never speak publicly about that night. The mine was sealed with industrial concrete, and Hazelton moved on from its tragedy. But 55 years later, when a demolition crew broke through a sealed basement while clearing the old Brackenridge mining offices, they found something that shouldn't exist: wire spool recordings of the mine's emergency radio system, preserved in an engineer's lockbox. The recordings captured 47 hours of desperate transmissions from the trapped miners, 47 hours after they were declared dead, while rescue equipment drilled in the wrong direction and concrete trucks arrived to seal them in forever. What investigators heard on those recordings would reveal that 31 men didn't die in an accident. They were murdered by the men who listened to their pleas for help and chose to bury them alive. The sledgehammer connected with the wall, and Jake Mitchell felt the floor shudder wrong. Not the solid, thoughtful impact against good foundation, but that hollow, drum-like vibration that meant empty space where there shouldn't be any. He'd been on enough demolition crews to know the difference. "Hold up," he called to Tommy Garner, who was winding up for another swing at the load-bearing beam. "Something's off." They were 3 days into tearing down the old Brackenridge Mining Company headquarters in Hazelton, Pennsylvania. The building had been empty since 1987. Windows boarded, copper pipes long since stripped by scavengers, but the bones of the place were solid. That old-fashioned construction with beams thick as tree trunks and foundations that went down deep. Tommy lowered his hammer. "What is it?" Jake knelt, pressing his palm flat against the floorboards. The wood was warped with age, that particular ripple that comes from decades of humidity with no climate control. But underneath, where the subfloor should have been solid on concrete, he felt it again. That wrongness. "Give me the pry bar." The first board came up easy. Too easy. The nails were rusted through, barely holding. Underneath, instead of the expected subflooring, there was a gap. Jake aimed his flashlight down through the hole. Jesus Christ. Tommy crowded in beside him. "What?" "There's another room down there. Not just a crawl space or a utility gap." Jake could see furniture edges in the darkness. A desk, what looked like filing cabinets, a hidden basement level that didn't appear on any of the building schematics they'd been given. It took them 40 minutes to pull up enough flooring to make an entry point. Jake went down first. The wooden ladder they'd improvised creaked under his weight. The smell hit him immediately. Not mold or rot like you'd expect, but something else. Paper, old paper and leather, and that particular staleness of air that hasn't moved in decades. His flashlight swept across the space. It was an office, frozen in time. The desk was metal military surplus style, covered in a thick layer of dust. Filing cabinets lined one wall. But what made Jake's throat close up was a wall behind the desk, covered in maps. Mining maps with sections marked in red ink. Dates written in careful handwriting. December 1950. "Jake, you okay down there?" Tommy called. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because he had just seen the nameplate on the desk, barely visible under the dust. Robert Sterling, chief engineer. His grandfather had died in the Brackenridge mine in December 1950. Jake's hands were shaking as he opened the first desk drawer. Empty. Second drawer. Same. But the third was locked. He grabbed the pry bar, not caring about preservation. The lock snapped with sound like a gunshot in a closed space. Inside was a metal lockbox, heavy enough that he needed both hands to lift it. No lock on this one, just a simple latch that opened with a soft click. The contents made no sense at first. Several round metal canisters, the kind that looked like film reels but different, heavier. There was a folded paper on top, brittle with age. Jake opened it carefully. It was a shift log, December 14th, 1950. Night shift, 31 names listed in neat columns. Third name down, Carl Mitchell. Foreman, Jake's grandfather. His chest went tight, that familiar ache that came whenever he encountered some unexpected reminder of the grandfather he'd never met. But this was different. This was hidden, deliberately concealed. Why would the chief engineer hide a routine shift log in a secret office? Tommy's voice drifted down. "Jake, we need to get down here now." Tommy descended, followed by their supervisor, Bill Hutchkins, who took one look at the space and pulled out his cell phone. "We need to stop work. This could be historical." But Jake wasn't listening. He'd found more papers under the metal canisters, receipts, delivery orders, all dated December 15th to 16th, 1950. The day after the mine collapse that killed his grandfather, 47 tons of industrial-grade concrete were rushed for delivery. His stomach dropped through the floor. "Why would they need concrete?" he said, not really asking anyone. "The mine collapsed. You don't pour concrete on collapse." Bill was examining the maps on the wall now, using his flashlight. "Jake, you need to see this." The map showed the Brackenridge mine layout in detail, tunnels spreading like veins beneath the town. But there were two versions layered on top of each other, the official layout in black ink and another version in red, showing additional tunnels that went where they shouldn't go, under the Susquehanna River. "That's illegal," Bill said quietly. "Mining under a river, without federal permits. That's a federal crime." Jake finished the sentence for him. He turned back to the desk, pulling out everything he could, more receipts, equipment rentals, and then at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal, Robert Sterling's personal notes. Jake opened it to December 1950. The handwriting was cramped, desperate. December 14th, 11:47 p.m., water breach in Section 7. Men trapped but alive. Brackenridge ordering seal. "This is murder," he read. December 15th, 2 a.m. They're still transmitting. Can hear them on emergency frequency. 31 voices. Brackenridge won't let rescue crews through. December 15th, 8 a.m. Concrete trucks arriving. God forgive us. Jake's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the journal. Tommy was reading over his shoulder. Holy, they were alive. There was more. So much more. But Jake's eyes locked on one line. December 16th, for PM, Carl Mitchell still organizing the men. His transmissions are clear. He knows we can hear him. He knows we're not coming. Jake set the journal down carefully, his vision going blurry. 31 men, including his grandfather, trapped underground, alive, calling for help while the company poured concrete to seal them in. "We need to call the police," Bill said. But Jake had found something else in the lockbox. A photograph, black and white, creased but clear. The entrance to the Brackenridge mine, not collapsed, not damaged, being filled with concrete while men in suits watched. The date stamp in the corner. December 15th, 1950, 9:47 a.m., 10 hours after the supposed cave-in, while 31 men were still alive underground. Jake lifted one of the metal canisters. It was heavier than expected, and there was something printed on the side in fading letters. Wire recording. Emergency mine frequency. December 14th to 17th, 1950. His grandfather's voice might be on these recordings, his last words, his calls for help that were deliberately ignored. "Don't touch anything else," Bill said, but his voice sounded far away. "This is a crime scene." Crime scene. 55 years old. But yes, this was evidence of murder. 31 count of murder covered up with concrete and cash settlements and decades of silence. Jake stood there in Robert Sterling's hidden office, surrounded by evidence of the worst betrayal imaginable. His grandfather hadn't died in a mining accident. He'd been murdered by men who heard his cries for help and chose to bury him alive rather than face federal charges for illegal mining. The metal canisters sat there holding voices from the dead, voices that had been silenced for 55 years. But not anymore. "Call the police," Jake said, his voice steady now despite the rage building in his chest. "And tell them to bring whoever handles cold cases, because 31 men were murdered in 1950, and I've got the proof right here." He picked up the photograph again. Those men in suits watching the concrete pour. One of them would be William Brackenridge, the mine owner, standing there in his expensive coat, checking his pocket watch while 31 men call for help on the emergency radio frequency just hundreds of feet below. Jake wondered if they could hear the hammering from underground, the desperate pounding of men who knew they were being sealed in. Or maybe they were too deep. Maybe all Brackenridge heard was the rumble of concrete trucks and the clink of coffee cups as they watched a mass grave being poured. The rage was cold now, crystallized into something harder. These recordings would change everything. The town's history, the families who'd been paid for their silence, the Brackenridge dynasty that still owned half the county. 55 years of lies were about to end. Jake Mitchell sat in Vernon Holt's cluttered repair shop, watching the old man's hands shake as he threaded the wire recording onto the playback machine. 3 days had passed since the discovery in Sterling's hidden office. 3 days of police tape and evidence teams and questions Jake couldn't answer, but they released the recordings to him. Copies, they said, after confirming he was Carl Mitchell's grandson. Haven't seen one of these in 30 years, Vern muttered, adjusting the playback head with jeweler's precision. His workshop smelled of solder and old electronics. Shelves stacked with radios and televisions from every decade since the 1940s. Wire recordings were already obsolete by 1950, but mines used them because they were durable and could survive conditions that would destroy tape. Jake's father, Dennis, sat in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't wanted to come. Nothing good will come of this, he'd said. But he was here now, watching Vern work with the kind of attention that suggested he was fighting not to leave. Your dad know we're doing this? Dennis asked. Dad, you're my dad. I mean Bill Holt, Vern's father. Does he know? Vern's hand still for a moment. My father's been dead 12 years. But yeah, he would have wanted to know. He died down there, too. Roy Henderson. The machine was ready. Vern had explained it would take time. The wire was fragile and could snap if played too fast. They'd have to go careful, patient. Jake wanted to tear through all of it and hear everything immediately, but Vern set the speed low, gentle. Here we go, Vern said, and hit play. Static first, then crackling, then emergency frequency check. This is Brackenridge Mine, Section 7. Foreman Carl Mitchell reporting. We have 31 men accounted for. Water breach in the main tunnel, but we've reached high ground. Requesting immediate assistance. Jake's throat closed. His grandfather's voice, calm, professional, alive, not panicked, just doing his job, making his report, expecting rescue. Time is approximately midnight, December 14th. We're in the auxiliary chamber above Section 7. Air is good. We have water and lunch pails, approximately 2 gallons total. Battery power on the emergency transmitter is strong. Please confirm receipt of this transmission. Silence. Then Carl's voice again, still steady. Brackenridge Control. This is Mitchell in Section 7. 31 souls requesting assistance. We can hear water moving below us, but our position is secure. Please respond. Dennis made a low sound in his throat. His hands were white-knuckled on his knees. More ecstatic, Jake thought, but the feeling was more complex. Then another voice, younger, frightened. Why aren't they answering, Carl? They're probably organizing the rescue. Save the battery, boys. 10 minutes every hour. That's all we broadcast. Vern fast-forwarded carefully. The wire sang as it spooled through. He stopped at another marker. Hour 4. Carl's voice slightly less steady now. This is Mitchell, Section 7. 31 men awaiting rescue. We can hear drilling. Repeat. We can hear drilling, but it sounds like it's moving away from us. Please confirm you have our position. We are in Section 7, auxiliary chamber above the water line. Jake heard it then in the background, faint but definite, the sound of drilling equipment. But Carl was right. It sounded distant, getting more distant. They're drilling the wrong way, Jake said. Vern nodded grimly. Keep listening. Hour 8. Mitchell, Section 7. The drilling has stopped. Please advise on rescue status. We've distributed the water. Eddie Coleman has a broken shoulder from the initial collapse, but he's stable. The men are in good spirits, but we need to know you're coming. Please respond. Please. That last please. The first crack in Carl Mitchell's professional composure. Dennis stood abruptly. I can't sit down, he said. You need to hear this, Jake said, surprised by the hardness in his own voice. Hour 12. The recording continued. A different voice now, also professional but with an undertone of worry. This is Roy Henderson taking over transmission duties. Foreman Mitchell is conserving his strength. We can hear new equipment above us. Heavy machinery. Sounds like trucks. Multiple trucks. Please advise on rescue timeline. The men want to know if you've notified our families. Vern's face had gone pale. That was his father's voice. Roy Henderson, dead at 32, leaving behind a pregnant wife and 3 kids. Hour 16. Roy continued. We're now hearing what sounds like concrete mixers. That can't be right. Please confirm the sounds we're hearing are rescue equipment. The men were getting concerned. Jake felt his stomach turn to ice. 16 hours after the collapse, and the concrete trucks were already there. Carl's voice returned, exhausted now. Hour 20. This is Mitchell. We need confirmation that you're attempting rescue. The water is rising slower than expected, but it is rising. We've moved to the highest point. I'm going to read the names of all men present for the record. He began reading. 31 names, each said clearly, carefully. Jake heard his grandfather give weight to every single name, making sure they be remembered. Roy Henderson, Dale Watson, Jimmy Sullivan, Frank Morrison, Eddie Coleman, Tom Garrett. On and on. All present, all alive, waiting for rescue. Static, then barely audible, someone in the background. They're not coming, are they? They're coming, Carl said, but not into the transmitter, to his men. They have to be coming. Vern stopped the playback. His hands were shaking worse. Now there's more. Hours and hours more. But I need to tell you something first, he said, looking at Dennis. My mother, Roy's wife, she swore she heard his voice on the radio. December 15th, middle of the day. She had my father's emergency frequency radio in the kitchen. Always did when he was on shift. She said she heard him calling. Dennis's face was gray. My mother said the same thing, he said. She said she heard Carl on the radio calling for help. The company told her it was impossible. That grief was making her imagine things. They were transmitting on the emergency frequency. Jake said slowly. Any radio tuned to that frequency would pick it up. Unless someone was jamming it, Vern said. He pulled out a box of papers. I've been researching since you called. December 15th, 1950. The FCC received complaint about radio interference across northeastern Pennsylvania. Powerful jamming on the emergency mine frequency. The investigation was dropped after Brackenridge Mining made a donation to the FCC Commissioner's re-election campaign. Jake wanted to punch something, to tear the whole shop apart. They jammed the signals. The families might have heard fragments, pieces that got through, but not enough. Not enough to prove their men were alive while the concrete was being poured. Play more, he said. Hour 24. Carl's voice. We know you can hear us. The drilling earlier. It was in Section 3. We're in Section 7. You're going the wrong way. Please. Section 7. Write it down. Tell the rescue crews. Section 7. A different voice, angry. They know where we are. They have to know. Why are they? Stay calm, Carl said, firm despite exhaustion. Panic is the enemy. We stay calm. We stay alive. Hour 30. Roy Henderson again. The concrete sound is getting louder. We don't understand what's happening up there. If you're sealing secondary tunnels to prevent further flooding, please be advised we are above the water line. Repeat, we are above the water line. We have time. You have time to reach us. Then, terrible in its clarity, a younger voice. Oh, God. Oh, God. They're sealing us in. They're sealing the mine. That's not possible, Carl sharp. The company wouldn't. Then what's the concrete for, Carl? What's the concrete for? Vern stopped the playback. The shop was silent, except for the hum of old electronics. There's 17 more hours, Vern said quietly. 17 more hours of them slowly realizing what was happening, organizing the remaining water, sharing the last of their carbide for light. Carl kept them together, kept broadcasting even after they all knew. Dennis was crying silently, tears running down weathered cheeks. Jake stood, pacing, hands clenched. We need to get these to the police, to the FBI, to someone. There's more you need to hear first. Vern said. He forwarded near the end. Hour 45. Carl's voice, barely a whisper now, but still clear. If someone finds these recordings, know that we didn't die in collapse. 31 men survived. We called for help for 2 days. They heard us. I know they heard us because we could hear them working above us, sealing us in. William Brackenridge, if you're listening to this, you murdered us. You murdered 31 men to hide your illegal mining operation. Our blood is on your hands. A pause and stronger. To our families, we love you. We talked about you constantly. Every memory, every story. You kept us human down here in the dark. We're scratching our names into the walls, so you'll know we didn't just disappear. We existed. We fought. We tried. Tell our children we were brave. Tell them we... The recording cut to static. Battery died, Vern said unnecessarily. The shop was tomb silent. Dennis stood abruptly and walked out. The bell above the door chimed incongruously cheerful. Jake started to follow, but Vern caught his arm. There's something else, Vern said. My father, before he died, he told me something. Said there was a man who came to the house in 1951 late at night, gave my mother an envelope full of cash, and said it was from concerned citizens who wanted to help. But the man said if she ever talked about hearing Roy's voice on the radio, the money would stop and other things might happen. Threats. His mother took the money. 5 kids to feed, no husband. She took it and never spoke about the radio transmissions again except to Vern's father years later, and he told Vern. Vern looked at the wire recorder. They all knew Jake. The whole town knew something was wrong, but Brackenridge money kept everyone quiet. Jake picked up a container with the remaining wire spools. Not anymore, he said. These recordings are going public tonight, he added. Brackenridge's grandson is a state senator now. They still own half the county. I don't care if they own the whole state. 31 men called for help while they were being buried alive. Everyone's going to hear their voices. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Make copies first. Multiple copies. Hide them in different places. Vern nodded. What are you going to do? Jake thought of his grandfather's voice. Calm and professional, even while being murdered. Keeping his men together, maintaining dignity in the face of unthinkable betrayal. I'm going to finish what he started. I'm going to make sure everyone knows their names. The wire recording spread through Hazelton like wildfire. Jake had uploaded them to the internet at 3 a.m., and by noon, Carl Mitchell's calm voice, counting off 31 living men, was playing on every news station in Pennsylvania. But Jake wasn't watching the news. He was back in Vern's shop, listened to hour after hour of recordings they hadn't played yet. Hour 18. Roy Henderson's voice crackled through the old speaker. The men wanted their families to know specifics. I'm going to let them talk, Jake said. A younger voice, maybe 20. Ma, it's Tommy Garrett. I'm okay. We're all okay. Tell Susan I love her. Tell her we were going to have that June wedding after all. When I get out, when they get us out. Another voice, older, gravelly. This is Frank Morrison. Helen, I left a mortgage payment in the coffee tin above the stove. Don't let them tell you I'm dead. We're not dead. We're right here. Jake's throat burned. These weren't last messages. These were men who still believed rescue was coming. The bell above the shop door chimed. Jake looked up, expecting another reporter. Instead, an elderly woman stood there, backbone straight to Spider Walker, eyes sharp as broken glass. You're the Mitchell boy, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. I'm Grace Sterling, Robert Sterling's daughter. She moved into the shop with surprising speed. I've been waiting 55 years for someone to find those recordings, she said. Vern stood and offered his chair. She waved him off. I was 23 in 1950, she said. Home from college for Christmas break. December 15th. My father came home at dawn. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Went straight to his study and locked the door. I heard him crying. My father never cried, not even when Mother died. She pulled an envelope from her purse. Hands liver-spotted but steady. He left me these, she said. If anyone ever asks about the mine, give them these. No one ever asked until now. Jake opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy but clear. The first showed the mine's command center, a room full of radio equipment, maps on the walls, men in suits clustered around a table. One man was circled in red ink, William Brackenridge. The second photo was worse. It showed Brackenridge holding a radio microphone and, in the background, clearly visible, a sign that read, "Emergency frequency, receiving transmission." They were listening. They had proof the men were alive, and they were listening. "There's more on the recordings," Vern said quietly. He'd been working while Jake and Grace talked, cataloging each hour. Hour 22. "You need to hear this." Carl Mitchell's voice, tired but still strong. "Mr. Brackenridge, I know you're listening. We can hear your response team directly above us. They're less than 40 feet away. We've been tapping on the pipes. The sound is carrying. Your engineers know exactly where we are. Please, William, I've worked for you for 15 years. These men have families. It's 3 days before Christmas. Please." Silence. Then, barely audible, someone crying in the background. "That's Eddie Coleman." Another voice said, "His wife just had a baby, 2 weeks old." Grace Sterling's face was stoned. "My father tried to override Brackenridge's orders. He tried to redirect the rescue teams. Brackenridge had him removed from the command center and threatened to have him arrested for interfering with emergency operations." Hour 28. Vern continued the playback. Roy Henderson. "Now we figured out. The illegal mining under the river. That's what this is about, isn't it? You hit water where you weren't supposed to be digging, and now you're covering it up. But we won't tell anyone," someone said. "The men have agreed. We'll say it was an accident, a natural pocket of water. We'll sign whatever you want. Just get us out. Please, God, just get us out." Jake slammed his fist on the workbench. Tools jumped and scattered. "They offered to lie for him," he said. "They offered to cover up his crime, and he's still—" 32, Burns said, forwarding the wire. "This is when it changes. Carl Mitchell again, but different now. Harder. Since you're listening but not responding, I'm going to make a record for whoever finds this. We are in Section 7, Auxiliary Chamber. Coordinates on the mine map are L7, approximately 200 feet below the surface. The water breach occurred at approximately 11:35 p.m. when Brackenridge Mining was illegally extracting coal from beneath the Susquehanna River. Federal maps will show this area as off-limits. Compare them to Brackenridge's extraction records. The evidence will be clear." A pause. "The following men are still alive as of—" A rustling sound. 8 a.m. December 16, 1950. He began reading names again, but this time after each name, he added something personal. "Roy Henderson has 3 kids and 1 on the way. Coaches Little League at St. Mary's. Dale Watson. Wife Margaret teaches school. Just bought the house on Elm Street. Jimmy Sullivan. Mother is sick with cancer. He's her only support. Frank Morrison has twin daughters, age 7. They're in the Christmas pageant tomorrow night." On and on. 31 names. 31 lives. Not just miners. Fathers, sons, husbands, brothers. Real people being murdered in real time, while their killer listened. "My father kept a journal," Grace said suddenly. "I brought that too." She pulled out a leather book. December 16, 1950. Jake read aloud. Brackenridge brought in federal inspectors at noon after the concrete had set, showed them the collapsed entrance. They never asked to check the emergency frequency. They never asked why we used 47 tons of concrete on a simple collapse. The Mitchell boy is still transmitting. His voice is getting weaker, but he's still trying. "God help me. I can't stand it." Hour 36. Vern said, new voice on the recording. "Weak, desperate. This is Dale Watson. Carl's resting, saving strength. We decided to take turns, keep the record going. The water's at knee level now. We've moved everything to the highest point. Some of the men are praying. Some are writing letters with pencil stubs on lunch bags. Jimmy Sullivan keeps saying his mother will think he abandoned her. She won't understand. Can someone tell her? Can someone tell her he didn't leave on purpose?" Background voices murmuring. Then Dale again. We can hear the concrete setting. It makes a sound like bones settling. That's what we're hearing. The tomb being sealed. Grace Sterling stood. I need to show you something else. Both of you come with me. They followed her outside to her car, a pristine 1980s Cadillac. From the trunk, she pulled out a metal box. My father went back, she said. January 1951, after everything was sealed, after the families were paid off, he went back with recording equipment. Jake's blood went cold. What did he record? Nothing, Grace said. For 3 hours, he sat with his equipment pressed against a concrete seal. Nothing. But then, just as he was leaving, he heard it. She pulled out another wire spool, this one marked differently. We should go back inside to play this, Burns said. No, Grace said. You need to hear it out here in the open. Because once you hear it, you'll understand why my father drank himself to death by 1952. She had a small battery-powered player in the box. Old, but functional. She threaded the wire with practiced ease. Static. Long, empty static. Then, so faint it might have been imagination, tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, Morse code, SOS, Byrne whispered. That's SOS. January 15th, 1951, Grace said. A full month after the collapse, someone was still alive down there, tapping on the pipes. My father said the pattern continued for 6 hours, then stopped forever. Jake couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Someone had survived for a month in the dark, in the cold, in the tomb Brackenridge had made. Who? He managed to ask. Grace shook her head. No way to know. But my father believed. He thought it might have been Carl. Your grandfather. He was the strongest, my father said. The most determined. If anyone could have rationed the food, the water, the carbide, could have survived on pure will alone. Hour 40, Vern said suddenly. He brought the player outside. There's something you need to hear. Carl's voice, very weak now, but clear. If one of us survives longer than the others, he's to keep signaling as long as possible. We've agreed. Whoever lasts longest has to try to leave proof we didn't just give up. Frank Morrison knows Morse code. He's teaching it to the rest of us. Simple pattern. SOS. If you hear tapping after we stop talking, know that someone is still fighting, still trying. Don't give up on us. The recording continued. Background voices teaching each other the pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Over and over, practicing for the unthinkable, being alone in the dark after the others were gone. The families never knew about the January recording. Grace said, my father couldn't bear to tell them. To let them know someone might have been alive that long. The guilt killed him. He wrote in his journal that he could have saved them all on December 15th if he just had the courage to shoot William Brackenridge and take over the rescue. She pulled out one more photograph. This was taken December 17th, 1950, at the sealed mine entrance. The photo showed a group of men in expensive suits, champagne glasses raised in a toast. William Brackenridge in the center, smiling. Behind them, fresh concrete gleamed wet in the flash. They're toasting, Jake said, his voice flat with disbelief. They just buried 31 men alive, and they're toasting. The federal inspectors had just left, Grace said. Brackenridge was celebrating. The illegal mining evidence was sealed away. The company was safe. Stock prices would remain stable. That's my father on the edge of the photo, the only one not holding a glass. Jake stared at the photo, at Brackenridge's satisfied smile, at the champagne glasses catching the light, at the wet concrete that was still settling over 31 men, who were at that very moment still breathing, still hoping, still tapping their names into the walls. We're going to destroy them, Jake said quietly. Every last person in this photo who's still alive, every company that benefited, every official who looked the other way, they're all going to pay. Grace Sterling smiled for first time, a terrible, satisfied expression. My father would like that. He spent 2 years gathering evidence before the drinking got too bad. I have it all. Every document, every receipt, every name. Hour 47. Burns said, the last transmission. Carl Mitchell's voice, barely a whisper. This is the final broadcast from Section 7. Our batteries are nearly dead. Most of the men are unconscious. We've carved our names into the walls as deep as we could. 31 names. Don't forget them. Don't let them disappear. We mattered. We lived. We were betrayed by men we trusted, but we didn't betray each other. Not once. We stayed together until the end. Tell our families we weren't afraid. Tell them we talked about them constantly. Tell them. The recording ended. Somewhere in town, church bells were ringing. It was Sunday. 55 years after 31 men realized they weren't being rescued. Their voices were finally being heard. But Jake couldn't shake the sound of that tapping. January 15th, 1951. Someone, maybe his grandfather, alone in the absolute darkness, still fighting, still signaling, still believing someone might care enough to listen. 30 days of darkness before the tapping stopped. We need to open that mine, Jake said. We need to get them out. It's been 55 years, Vern said gently. I don't care. They scratched their names in the walls. They're still down there waiting. We're going to bring them home. Grace Sterling touched his arm. I know who can help. Some of the rescue crew from 1950 are still alive. They were ordered to stop digging. They've been waiting 55 years to finish the job. Some had scratched more than once, the letters getting shakier, more desperate as time passed. Hour 46. Carl's voice from above, from the recorder. Vern was still playing. The water's rising faster. Some of the men have stopped responding. We're running out of time. I want to say his voice broke. The first time in 46 hours. Rose, if you hear this, I love you. Dennis, my son. Grow up strong. Grow up kind. Don't let what happened here make you hard. And someone, anyone, remember us. Remember, we didn't give up. Remember, we... Static. The batteries had died. Jake's light found something else. In the corner, arranged in a perfect circle just above the waterline, were the lunch pails. 31 of them, placed with care, like an offering, like a final act of dignity in chaos. He waded over, his legs numb from the cold water. The first pail had a name scratched on it. T. Garrett. Inside, wrapped in wax paper that had somehow survived, was a note. The pencil was faint but readable. Marcy, use the insurance money to get out of town. Don't let them buy your silence. Love, Tom. Every pail had a note. 31 final messages protected in wax paper, waiting 55 years to be found. Jake's light swept the chamber again and found them, the bodies or what remained. They were against a far wall above the eventual flood line, not scattered in panic, but arranged, sitting against the wall in a line, shoulder to shoulder. They'd face the end together, deliberately with dignity. One body was separate from the others, positioned near the ventilation shaft, smaller than the rest. Jimmy Sullivan, Jake whispered. He'd been trying to climb out. 19 years old, small enough to fit. He tried to reach the shaft that was being capped above him. His light caught something else. On the wall, separate from the names, carved larger and deeper than anything else, was a message. William Brackenridge knew we were alive. William Brackenridge murdered us. S. December 14th to 17th, 1950. 31 men. This was not an accident. Below it, in different handwriting, scratched with something sharp and deliberate. C. Mitchell Foreman. I stayed conscious longest. I heard you sealing us in. I heard you celebrating. God sees what you did. December 20th, 1950. December 20th. Carl had survived 6 days. 6 days in the dark, in the cold, surrounded by the dead, still scratching truth into stone. Jake's hand shook as he photographed everything. The names, the messages, the bodies, the lunch pails, the final accusation, evidence that would destroy Brackenridge Industries, that would rewrite history, that would finally bring justice. Hour 47. Burns' voice called down. Jake, there's a 47 hour. We missed it before. It's not Carl. I think it's Brackenridge. Jake climbed up quickly, lungs burning from the foul air. Vern had found another wire spool labeled differently. He played it. William Brackenridge's voice, cold, matter-of-fact. December 17th, 1950. 2 a.m. for the company records, sealed separately. The situation in Section 7 has been contained. Federal inspectors have accepted the cave-in explanation. Families are being approached with settlements. The concrete will hold indefinitely. The illegal extraction zone is now permanently inaccessible. Company assets are protected. A pause. They stopped transmitting 3 hours ago. It's finished. Another pause, longer. Robert Sterling suggests we attempt recovery in a few years when the tension has died down. I've overruled him. The bodies stay where they are. The evidence stays buried. This recording will be sealed in the company vault as insurance against future liability. The official story stands. 31 men died instantly in a cave-in. Heroes of American industry. The recording clicked off. Jake stood in the darkness, covered in the muck of his grandfather's tomb, holding the evidence of premeditated mass murder. "We've got them," he said. "We've got everything." Grace Sterling was crying. Dennis stood silent, staring at the mine entrance. Vern was already on his phone, calling news stations. "There's one more thing," Jake said. He pulled out one of the lunch pails he'd brought up. Carl Mitchell's was inside. Along with the note to Rose and Dennis was another piece of paper, fresher. It must have been written days later, when Carl was alone, in barely legible scratching. "If my grandson finds this, I dreamed of you in the dark. I dreamed I had a grandson. Strong, determined, the kind of man who wouldn't let injustice stand. I'm probably delirious. But if you're real, if you're reading this, you are my light in this darkness. You are my proof that something good came from my life. Find us. Free us. Tell the truth. Grandpa Carl." December 19th, 1950. Still fighting. Jake held the note against his chest and sobbed. Dennis embraced his son, both of them crying for the man they'd never known, who had thought of them in his final hours, who had refused to surrender even when surrender would have been mercy. In the distance, sirens wailed. Police, probably maybe FBI. It didn't matter. They had the evidence. They had the truth. 31 men were about to come home. The FBI had seized everything from the Brackenridge Industries headquarters before dawn. Jake watched from across the street as agents carried out box after box of documents, their evidence tape gleaming in the morning sun. But he wasn't satisfied. The wire recordings had mentioned a command center, the place where Brackenridge had listened to the dying men. It had to still exist somewhere. "Found it," Vern said, approaching with a folder of archived newspapers. December 15th, 1950. The Hazelton Gazette. Rescue operations coordinated from Brackenridge Executive Mine Office. Address: 1247 Mountain Road. That's the old administrative building near Shaft 2. That's been condemned for decades, Dennis said. Roof partially collapsed in the 80s. Perfect place to hide evidence. Jake said. Grace Sterling pulled up in her Cadillac. Since their discovery 3 nights ago, she'd been working with federal prosecutors. But she looked exhausted. "They arrested Howard Brackenridge this morning," she said. "But his lawyers are already fighting the charges, saying the evidence is too old. Chain of custody issues. We need more." "Then let's go get it," Jake said. The drive to the old administrative building took them through the abandoned part of Hazelton's mining district. Empty company houses lined the streets, windows dark, porches collapsed. This whole section of town had died when the mine closed. The building at 1247 Mountain Road was a 2-story brick structure, its windows boarded, condemned signs plastered across the entrance. But Jake noticed something immediately. Fresh tire tracks in the overgrown parking lot. "Someone's been here recently," he said. They entered through a side door that had been pried open years ago. Inside the building was a maze of empty offices, fallen ceiling tiles, and scattered furniture. But Jake was looking for something specific. A room with radio equipment, maps on the walls. They found it in the basement. The door was locked, but the wood was rotted. Dennis kicked it open. Inside, frozen in time like a museum of murder, was the command center. Radio equipment covered one wall, 1950s-era transmitters and receivers, dials and switches. Maps of the mine covered every wall, marked with red X's, showing where rescue teams had been sent. All in the wrong places. But it was the corkboard that made Jake's blood run cold. Pinned to it were photographs. Not just any photographs. Pictures of the 31 miners, their company ID photos. Each one had a red line drawn through it with a time written beneath. Time of death, Grace whispered. They were marking when each man stopped talking. Carl Mitchell's photo had the latest time, December 17th, 3:47 a.m. final transmission. Jake pulled out his camera, documenting everything. Then he saw it, a metal filing cabinet in the corner, locked but not impregnable. The pry bar made quick work of it. Inside were transcripts, not just of the miners' transmissions, but of the response team's discussions. Someone had documented every word spoken in this room during those 47 hours. Jake read aloud. December 14th, 11:58 p.m. Brackenridge. How many heard the transmission? Sterling. Just us. The emergency frequency is closed circuit. Brackenridge. Keep it that way. Start the concrete delivery. Sterling. Sir, they're alive. All of them. Brackenridge. They're dead men walking. They've seen the illegal shafts. Unknown voice. We could get them out and pay them to Brackenridge. You think 31 miners will keep quiet about federal crimes? Use your head. Dennis grabbed another transcript, his hands shaking. December 15th, 4 a.m. radio operator. Mitchell's asking for his wife. Want to talk to her. Brackenridge. Absolutely not. Radio operator. Sir, just to say goodbye. Brackenridge. No contact. Any transmission from us could be traced later. Let them talk to the walls. They heard everything. Vern said, reading another page. Every plea, every prayer, every message to their families, and they sat here discussing it like a business problem. Grace found something else, a leather journal hidden behind the filing cabinet. She opened it carefully. It's my father's, she said. His real journal, not the one he kept at home. She read December 15th, 10 a.m. I've become complicit in mass murder. The men below are organizing their own funeral, scratching their names into walls while we pump concrete into their tomb. Brackenridge sits here eating sandwiches, checking his watch like he's waiting for a train. I recorded everything on wire spools, hidden copies. If I die, someone needs to know what happened in this room. Jake found a box labeled Evidence. Destroy after settlement. Inside were more photos. The rescue teams drilling in the wrong directions, obviously staged for the cameras. Brackenridge shaking hands with federal inspectors in front of the sealed mine. But one photo was different. It showed the command center during the crisis. Men in suits clustered around the radio equipment and, in the reflection of a window, barely visible, the photographer himself, Robert Sterling. My father took this, Grace said. He documented their crime while participating in it. There's more equipment. Dennis said from a closet. He pulled out a dusty box containing more wire recording spools. These are labeled differently. Outgoing transmissions. Vern's eyes widened. They did respond. They recorded their own responses. They didn't have playback equipment here, but Jake carefully packed the spools. Then he noticed something else, a map with a route marked in pencil. It led from the mine to a location marked secondary containment. What's secondary containment? Jake asked. Grace studied the map. That's Riverside Cemetery. That's where they built the memorial. The memorial is built over something. Dennis said slowly. What do they bury under it? They left the command center and drove to Riverside Cemetery. The Brackenridge Mining Memorial stood on a hill overlooking the town, a black granite monument listing the names of the 31 dead men. Flowers lay at its base, fresh ones from the recent news coverage. It was built in summer 1951. Grace said, Brackenridge paid for everything, insisted on a location, the specific spot. Jake walked around the monument. The foundation was much larger than necessary for a simple memorial. We need ground-penetrating radar, he said. Something's under here. Or, Vern said, pointing to a maintenance shed, we could check the cemetery records. The shed was locked, but they were past caring about trespassing. Inside, filing cabinets held burial records going back a century. Vern found 1951. Here he read, Special Interment, July 1951. Sealed concrete vault 8 feet. by 8 feet by 6 feet deep. Contents: mining equipment and personal effects from Brackenridge disaster. Sealed by order of William Brackenridge. Personal effects, Jake said. They buried evidence. His phone rang. It was the FBI agent handling the case. Mr. Mitchell, we need you to come to the federal building. Howard Brackenridge's lawyer is claiming the wire recordings are fabricated. We need you to... I'll do one better, Jake said. Bring an excavation team to Riverside Cemetery. We're standing on top of more evidence. 3 hours later, the cemetery looked like an archaeological dig. The FBI had cordoned off the area, and workers carefully removed the memorial piece by piece. When they reached the concrete vault beneath, Jake could see it had been sealed with unusual care. Multiple layers, reinforced steel, built to last forever. It took industrial equipment to break through. When they finally opened it, the FBI agent stepped back, letting Jake and the families go first. Inside the vault were 31 mining helmets, each tagged with name. 31 broken watches, all stopped between 11:47 p.m., December 14th, and 3:47 a.m., December 17th, and 31 small boxes, each containing personal effects that should have been returned to families. Wedding rings, pocket watches, photographs the men had carried. But there was more. A metal strongbox sealed separately. Inside, William Brackenridge had left his insurance policy and detailed documentation of the entire cover-up. Receipts, signed orders, even photographs of the men's bodies taken to the ventilation shafts before they were sealed. He kept proof of his own crime as protection against his co-conspirators. The FBI agent whistled low. This is a signed confession. He documented everything. Jake picked up his grandfather's helmet. Inside the leather band was tucked a small photo, Rose Mitchell holding baby Dennis, dated 1949. Carl had carried his family with him into the dark. There's one more spool, the agent said, lifting a wire recording from the bottom of the box. It's labeled Final Statement, WB, January 1951. They played it right there in the cemetery with the town spread below them. William Brackenridge's voice, older, tired. This recording is my insurance. If anyone attempts to expose the events of December 1950, remember that I have documented every official who took bribes, every inspector who falsified reports, every town leader who accepted our money. The list includes 2 senators, a federal judge, and the governor's chief of staff. If I go down, northeastern Pennsylvania goes with me. A pause. The 31 men in that mine were heroes. I suppose they chose truth over life. Admirable if pointless. But I had 3,000 employees depending on Brackenridge Industries. I chose a many over few. History will judge me, but history is written by the survivors. And I survived. Another pause, longer. Sterling's boy keeps saying he can still hear tapping from the mine, Morse code, SOS. I've had the ventilation shafts filled with additional concrete. If someone is still alive down there, well, they won't be for long. This is my final word on the matter. The mine stays sealed. The truth stays buried. The company survives. The recording ended. He knew, Dennis said, his voice breaking. He knew someone might still be alive, and he sealed the vents anyway. January 15th, Jake said quietly. Grace's father heard the tapping on January 15th. Brackenridge had the vents filled on January 10th. The tapping Robert Sterling heard was through solid concrete. Someone, maybe my grandfather, was still tapping SOS through solid concrete 5 days after the vents were sealed. The FBI agent was on his phone, calling prosecutors. We have enough to charge Howard Brackenridge with conspiracy to commit murder, even if he was only 26 when it happened. He inherited this evidence. He knew. He kept it hidden. But Jake wasn't listening. He was looking at the recovered evidence, the carefully preserved proof of mass murder. William Brackenridge had saved it all, thinking it protected him. Instead, it would destroy everything he'd built. The sun was setting over Hazelton, painting the old mining district gold. Somewhere beneath their feet, 31 men still waited in their tomb. But their voices had finally been heard. Their truth was finally free. We need to have a proper funeral, Jake said. Once they're brought up, all 31 buried properly with their real stories told. Grace Sterling nodded. My father would want to be there. His ashes, he never forgave himself for his role. Maybe this will let him rest. As they left the cemetery, Jake noticed people gathering at the fence. Families of the dead miners. Some he recognized from old photos. They stood silent, watching, waiting. 55 years of questions were finally being answered, but one question remained. When they opened Section 7, what else would they find? What other messages had the dying men left in those final days? Tomorrow, the real excavation would begin. Tomorrow, 31 men would finally come home. The mine entrance loomed in the darkness, concrete seal intact despite 55 years of weather. Jake, Dennis, Vern, and Grace had arrived at 2 a.m. with industrial cutting equipment from Grace's father's collection. No permits, no permission, just determination. This is illegal, Vern said again, but he was already unloading the concrete saw. They've been illegal for 55 years. Jake replied, We're just balancing the scales. The concrete was harder than expected. Industrial grade, poured thick. It took 3 hours of cutting to breach it, the noise splitting the night. Jake kept expecting police, but none came. Maybe Grace had made some calls. Maybe God was finally paying attention. When the hole was wide enough, Jake rigged a harness and rope. I'm going down, he said. Jake, my grandfather, my risk, someone said. He descended to the jagged concrete opening, headlamp cutting through darkness that hadn't been disturbed in 55 years. 20 feet, 30. Then his boots hit water. The auxiliary chamber was smaller than he'd imagined. Knee-deep water, black and still. But his light caught something that made his breath stop. The walls. Every inch above the waterline was covered in scratched names. Deep gouges in stone overlapping, desperate. Carl Mitchell, husband to Rose, father to Dennis. Roy Henderson, tell my children I was brave. Jimmy Sullivan, mother, I'm sorry. 31 names with messages carved by fingernails and belt buckles and anything they could find. His light swept left and found them. The bodies were against a far wall above what must have been the eventual flood line. Not scattered in panic, but arranged, sitting in a line, shoulder to shoulder, facing the entrance they'd known would be sealed, waiting with dignity for a rescue that never came. One body sat apart from the others near the center. Even after 55 years, Jake could tell from the position, and from the foreman's helmet still on the skull. Carl Mitchell. He'd positioned himself in front of his men, facing the entrance as if standing guard. In the corner, arranged in a perfect circle just above the waterline, were the lunch pails, 31 of them, placed with care. Jake waded over, his legs numb from the cold water. The first pail he opened had a name scratched on it. T. Garrett. Inside, wrapped in wax paper that had somehow survived, was a note. Marcy, don't let them buy your silence. Tom. Every pail held a note. 31 final messages protected and waiting. But it was Carl Mitchell's pail that made Jake's hand shake, along with the note to Rose and Dennis. There was another paper written later, when Carl must have been alone. If my grandson finds this, I dreamed of you in the dark. I dreamed I had a grandson, strong, determined. You are my light in this darkness. Find us, free us, tell the truth. Grandpa Carl. December 19th, 1950. Still fighting. Jake photographed everything. The bodies, the carved names, the lunch pails, the messages, evidence that would destroy Brackenridge Industries. Then his light caught the largest carving, separate from the names. William Brackenridge knew we were alive. William Brackenridge murdered us. 31 men. This was not an accident. Below it, in different scratches. See, Mitchell, I stayed conscious longest. I heard you sealing us in. God sees what you did. December 20th, 1950. 6 days. Carl had survived 6 days. Near another body, smaller, younger, more scratching. J. Sullivan, January 10th, 1951. Still here, still tapping. Mom, I'm sorry. The 19-year-old had lived almost a month in absolute darkness with 30 corpses, still tapping SOS that no one would hear. Jake, Dennis called down. Police are coming. Jake grabbed Carl's lunch pail and climbed quickly. As sirens approached, he looked back at the hole they'd cut. 31 men were visible now. Found witness. Let them arrest us. Jake said, holding his grandfather's final note. We got what we came for. Proof they didn't just die. They were murdered while begging for help, and we can finally bring them home. The police cars pulled up, lights flashing. But Jake noticed the FBI was with them. Someone had made calls. The real excavation would begin at dawn, 55 years late. But the rescue had finally come. The excavation of Section 7 had taken 3 weeks. Jake stood at the edge of the open mine shaft, watching as the first body bag was raised to the surface. The FBI had wanted to handle all, but the families had fought for the right to be present, to witness, to receive their dead properly after 55 years. The 31 bodies had been found exactly as Jake had first seen them, arranged against the wall, shoulder to shoulder, with one exception. Jimmy Sullivan, the 19-year-old who tried to climb the ventilation shaft, whose fingernails had been torn away from clawing at the sealed steel plate above. But it was what they found with Carl Mitchell's body that changed everything. Mr. Mitchell, the forensic technician, called, "You need to see this." Jake descended into the mine one last time. His grandfather's body was still where they'd found him, separate from the others, positioned near a wall covered with his final messages. In his lap, protected by his jacket and wrapped in what looked like pages torn from a maintenance logbook, was a bundle of papers. The technician carefully lifted them, placed them in an evidence bag. He had protected these deliberately, wrapped them in waterproof cloth from an equipment tarp, then kept them under his jacket. Whatever these were, he wanted them preserved. In the temporary forensics tent, they carefully separated the pages. Jake, Dennis, and Grace watched as the technician used special lights and preservation techniques to make the faded pencil visible. The first page was dated December 17th, 1950, for AM, just minutes after the batteries had died, after the last radio transmission. Carl Mitchell's handwriting, shaky but clear. The radio is dead. The men are unconscious or sleeping. I remain awake. Someone must witness. Someone must record. I will write until I cannot. Roy Henderson died at 3:15 a.m. He was talking about his children, said their names over and over. I promised to remember them. Thomas, age 7. Margaret, age 5. Susan, age 3. Baby unnamed. Due Christmas. Jake's throat burned as his grandfather documented each death, each man's final words, final thoughts. December 18th, noon. I think, no way to tell time except by counting. Dale Watson died, holding a photo of his wife. Kissed it before he went. Asked me to tell her he wasn't afraid. He was afraid. We all are, but the lie might comfort her. Frank Morrison went quietly, carved his daughter's initials into his palm with a nail. Said pain reminded him he was still alive, still their father. I am now alone with 27 dead men. The water has receded some. I've moved the bodies above the water line. They deserve dignity. Dennis covered his face, shoulders shaking. Grace gripped Jake's arm hard enough to hurt. The next pages were different. Carl had started writing smaller, conserving paper. December 19th. Found Jimmy Sullivan's hidden stash of carbide. The boy was saving it, probably hoping to signal if rescue came. Used it to see while I arranged the men properly. They will not be found scattered like animals. They'll be found as they were. Brothers. I've been thinking about Dennis, my son. He'll grow up without me. Rose is strong. She'll remarry. I hope he's kind to my boy. I hope Dennis knows his father loved him. I hope he knows I thought of him every hour down here. The tapping continues. I've been doing it so long it's automatic now. SOS, SOS, SOS. My knuckles are raw, but the pain keeps me focused. Someone might hear. Someone might come. Then dated December 20th. William Brackenridge, I know you'll read this someday. Your guilt will make you check. You'll want to know what we said about you in the dark. Here it is. We forgave you, not for your sake, for ours. Hate takes energy, and we needed our energy to survive. But forgiveness is not absolution. You are a murderer. You killed 31 men for money. God sees. History will see. Your children will see. To whoever finds this, We could have saved ourselves by agreeing to Brackenridge's crimes. We refused, not from nobility, but from knowing that more men would die in those illegal tunnels. Our silence would have killed others. So we chose to die speaking truth. The next section was different. The handwriting was worse, wandering across the page. December 21st. I think the dark is complete. The carbide is gone. I write by touch, hoping these words are legible. The human mind isn't meant for absolute darkness. I see things, lights that aren't there, faces of the dead, Rose, sometimes standing in the corner telling me to come home. I know she's not real, but I talk to her anyway. I've been thinking about legacy, what we leave behind. I'm leaving behind a son who will never know me. These words, the truth on these walls, is it enough? How do you compress a life into scratches on stone? Jake turned the page. The writing was larger now. Desperate. December 22nd. Water rising again. Moved to highest point. Can barely feel my hands. Still tapping. Always tapping. Someone might hear. Someone might come. The dead men watch me. I arrange and rearrange them. They deserve dignity. We all deserve dignity. I dreamed I had a grandson. Strange dream for a dying man, but clear. A young man, strong, determined. He was reading these words. He was bringing us home. Probably delusion from lack of oxygen, but a comfort. If you're real grandson, know that you were my light in this darkness. That was a passage Jake had found in the lunch pail. But there was more. December 23rd, 7 days. 7 days in the dark with the dead. I've carved everyone's names again. Deeper. The stone is hard, but I have nothing but time. Each name a life. Each life a story. The stone will remember even if the world forgets. Can hear something. Drilling? No. Different. Softer. Concrete being poured. They're sealing the ventilation shafts. The last air will go soon, but I keep tapping. SOS, SOS. Someone might hear. The next page was barely legible. The writing wandering wildly. December 24th. Christmas Eve. Rose will be at her mother's. She makes ham on Christmas Eve. Turkey on Christmas Day. Dennis will get the rocking horse I built, hidden in McJarre's barn. Someone tell her the boy should have his gift. The dead men and I are having Christmas dinner. Imaginary feast. Morrison says the turkey's too dry. Henderson wants more gravy. We laugh. The dead men laugh with me in the dark. Is this madness? Does it matter? Still tapping. Knuckles bleeding but still tapping. It's my heartbeat now. SOS. I exist. I exist. I exist. Then the last entry. The writing so faint they needed special equipment to read it. December 25th, 1950. Christmas. Alone, always alone, but also not alone. 30 brothers sleep around me. We came down together. We'll leave together someday. To Rose, I loved you from the moment I saw you at the church social. You wore a yellow dress. You laughed at my terrible jokes. Thank you for Dennis. Thank you for 7 years of morning coffee and evening conversations. Thank you for loving a simple miner. To Dennis, be good to your mother. Be kind. Be brave. Be better than the men who did this to us. I'm proud of you, son, for the man you'll become. To William Brackenridge, I forgive you, but forgiveness is not forgetting. These words are my witness against you. You thought you were buying 31 men. You were buying 31 ghosts. We will haunt your legacy forever. I stop writing now. Stop tapping. Stopping. The dark is complete, and I am... The sentence ended mid-word. The tent was silent, except for Dennis's broken sobbing. Jake held the pages like they were made of gold. His grandfather had survived 11 days. 11 days in absolute darkness, surrounded by death. Still writing. Still witnessing. Still tapping out his existence. There's more, the technician said quietly. She had been examining Carl's clothing. In his breast pocket, she carefully extracted a small notebook, the kind miners use for shift notes. Inside, every page was covered with the same words, written over and over, sometimes neat, sometimes scrawled, sometimes in the dark. Dennis Mitchell, my son. Dennis Mitchell, my son. Dennis Mitchell, my son. Hundreds of times, a father holding on to his child's name like a lifeline in the darkness. Dennis collapsed. Jake caught him, both of them cried. Grace Sterling stood quietly, tears streaming down her face. We need to release this, Jake said finally. All of it, every word. The world needs to know what kind of man Carl Mitchell was, what kind of men they all were. The FBI agent nodded. Howard Brackenridge's lawyers won't be able to fight this. This is testimony from the grave. 31 men's dying testimony. But Jake was thinking about something else. December 25th, 1950. His grandfather had died on Christmas Day, alone in the dark, still thinking of his family, still forgiving the men who murdered him, still insisting on dignity for his dead brothers. The tapping, Jake said suddenly. Grace, your father heard tapping on January 15th. Grace's eyes widened. But that's 3 weeks after someone else survived, Jake said. After my grandfather died, someone else kept tapping. They went back to the forensic evidence. On the wall near Jimmy Sullivan's body, scratched faintly into the stone, J. Sullivan, January 10th, 1951. Still here, still tapping. Mom, I'm sorry. The 19-year-old had survived almost a month in absolute darkness, surrounded by the dead, still tapping SOS on pipes that would never bring rescue. Jesus Christ, the FBI agent whispered. The full horror of it settled over them. Not just a murder of 31 men, but the slow, agonizing death over weeks. The last survivor, barely more than a boy, tapping his existence into unhearing stone 300 feet below a world that had already forgotten him. We need to identify all the remains, Jake said. Every man needs to go home to his family. They need to be buried properly with their names, their stories, their truth. As they prepared to leave, Jake looked back at the evidence bag containing his grandfather's final testament. 11 days of documenting death, maintaining dignity, insisting on truth. Carl Mitchell hadn't just died in that mine. He becomes something more, a witness, a chronicler, a guardian of the dead. And now, 55 years later, his testimony would destroy an empire built on murder. The rocking horse was still in McJarre's barn. They found it that afternoon, covered in dust but intact. Dennis ran his hands over it, the wood smooth from his grandfather's careful sanding. He thought of this. Dennis said, dying in the dark, and he thought to tell someone about my Christmas gift. That was who Carl Mitchell was. That was who they all were, men who faced death thinking of others, who maintained their humanity in an inhuman situation, who chose truth over survival. 31 heroes finally coming home. The courthouse in Harrisburg was packed beyond capacity. Jake sat in the front row, flanked by Dennis and the other families of the 31 miners. Across the aisle, Howard Brackenridge sat rigid. His legal team surrounded him like a wall. At 81, he still looked like his father. The same cold eyes, the same cruel mouth. It had been 2 months since they'd opened Section 7. 2 months of exhumations, identifications, and evidence processing. But today was different. Today, the wire recordings would be played in open court. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the state will now present audio evidence recorded between December 14th and December 17th, 1950. The courtroom fell silent as Carl Mitchell's voice filled the space. Emergency frequency check. This is Brackenridge Mine, Section 7. Foreman Carl Mitchell reporting. We have 31 men accounted for. Water breach in the main tunnel, but we've reached high ground. Requesting immediate assistance. Howard Brackenridge's jaw tightened. He'd heard these recordings before, but hearing them in court with the families present, with the media recording every word, this was different. The prosecutor let it play, hour by hour. The hope turned confusion, confusion to fear, fear to terrible understanding. Hour 20, Carl's exhausted voice. We need confirmation that you're attempting rescue. The water is rising slower than expected, but it is rising. We've moved to the highest point. I'm going to read the names of all men present for the record. As Carl read the 31 names, family members in the gallery began crying. Some had never heard their father's name spoken aloud by someone who knew them. Then came the worst part. Hour 36. Dale Watson's voice, weak but clear. We can hear the concrete setting. It makes a sound like bones settling. That's what we're hearing. The tomb being sealed. Howard Brackenridge's lawyer stood. Objection. These recordings haven't been authenticated. They've been authenticated by 3 separate forensic audio experts. The judge said coldly. Overruled. Continue. The prosecutor changed recordings. This next audio was recorded in the Brackenridge Command Center during the same time period. William Brackenridge's voice filled the courtroom. There are dead men walking. They've seen the illegal shafts. Use your head. 31 miners won't keep quiet about federal crimes. Gasped from the gallery. Even Howard Brackenridge flinched. Then the January recording, William Brackenridge again. Sterling's boy keeps saying he can still hear tapping from the mine. Morse code, SOS. I've had the ventilation shafts filled with additional concrete. If someone is still alive down there, well, they won't be for long. Monster, someone shouted from the gallery. The judge banged his gavel, but without much conviction. The prosecutor approached Howard Brackenridge. Mr. Brackenridge, you inherited control of Brackenridge Industries in 1975, correct? Yes. And you also inherited your father's private papers. Some of them, including the evidence we found in the memorial vault. The evidence your father buried. Howard's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. I never opened that vault, but you knew it existed, Howard said. My father mentioned it, Howard added, said it contained historical documents. The prosecutor pulled out a document. This is a memo from you to your head of security, dated 1987. You ordered increased surveillance on the old mine site because, and I quote, the situation from 1950 requires continued containment. What situation were you referring to? Howard was sweating now. There were safety concerns. Safety concerns that required you to pay off 3 different urban exploration groups who got too close to finding the command center, the prosecutor said. Jake watched Howard crumble. The man had spent 30 years protecting his father's secret, and now it was destroying him. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, I'd like to call Vernon Holt to testify about the radio signals his mother heard. Vern took the stand. His testimony was devastating in its simplicity. His mother had heard his father's voice on the radio calling for help. She'd been dismissed as hysterical. She died believing she'd imagined it. She didn't imagine it, Vern said, looking directly at Howard Brackenridge. My father was calling for help, and your father made sure no one could answer. One by one, family members testified. Stories of mothers who never recovered, of children who grew up in poverty because their father's deaths were deemed accidents without full compensation, of families destroyed by silent agreements they couldn't afford not to sign. Then Jake took the stand. Tell us about finding your grandfather's final notes, the prosecutor said. Jake described Carl Mitchell's 11-day survival, his documentation of each man's death, his maintenance of dignity in unimaginable circumstances. He read the Christmas Day entry aloud, his voice breaking at, Thank you for Dennis. Thank you for 7 years of morning coffee and evening conversations. The defense might argue, the prosecutor said, that William Brackenridge made a business decision, that he chose to save his company. How do you respond to that? Jake looked at Howard Brackenridge. My grandfather and his men offered to lie. They offered to cover up the illegal mining to save themselves. Your father refused. He didn't kill them to protect the company. He killed them because it was easier than saving them. The prosecutor played one more recording. It was new, found just days ago in Brackenridge Industries' own archives. William Brackenridge speaking to his board of directors in January 1951. The situation has been resolved. The federal investigation is closed. The families have been managed. In 10 years, no one will remember their names. In 20 years, it will be like they never existed. But we exist, Jake said from the witness stand. The sons and daughters and grandchildren of the men you murdered. We exist, and we remember, and we're here to collect what you owe. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, Jake was surrounded by reporters, but he pushed through them to where Grace Sterling stood with a small urn. My father's ashes, she said. I'm going to scatter them at the memorial service tomorrow. He can finally rest with the men he couldn't save. The memorial service was planned for the next day. All 31 miners would be buried properly with full honors. Their real story finally told. The governor would speak. The president had sent condolences. The mining union was creating a permanent memorial. But first, there was more testimony. After the recess, an unexpected witness was called. Thomas Garrett, 93 years old, the federal inspector who'd signed off on the false report. He was wheeled in, oxygen tank attached, but his voice was clear. I took a bribe, he said simply. $20,000 to say I'd inspected the mine and found it naturally collapsed. I never went down, never looked, just signed what Brackenridge told me to sign. Why are you testifying now? The prosecutor asked. Because I'm dying, Garrett said. Lung cancer. Weeks left, maybe days. And I hear them. Hear who? The 31 men. Every night for 55 years. I hear them calling for help. Hear them saying their names. I need them to know. I need their families to know. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. He broke down completely, the oxygen mask muffling his sobs. Even Howard Brackenridge looked away. The prosecutor stood for closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about the murder of 31 men, though that alone would be enough. This is about a system of power that decided working men's lives were worth less than rich men's profits. It's about a cover-up that involved judges, inspectors, officials, an entire structure built to ensure that some lives matter and some don't. He played Carl Mitchell's voice one more time. Someone must witness. Someone must record. Carl Mitchell witnessed. He recorded. And now, 55 years later, we must act. Howard Brackenridge didn't pull the trigger, the prosecutor continued, but he inherited blood money and spent 30 years ensuring the truth stayed buried. That makes him an accessory after the fact to 31 murders. The defense's closing was weak, focusing on statutes of limitations and the impossibility of prosecuting crimes from 1950. But everyone knew it was over. The evidence was too overwhelming, the public outrage too intense. As they waited for the verdict, Jake stood outside the courthouse with the families. Vern was there, and Dennis, and dozens of children and grandchildren of the murder miners. Whatever happens in there, Jake said, we did it. We brought them home. We told their truth. It's not enough, someone said. Not for 55 years of lies. No, Jake agreed, but it's a start. His phone rang. It was the foreman of the jury. We have a verdict. They filed back in. Howard Brackenridge stood as the verdict was read. On 31 count of accessory after the fact of murder, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Families crying, embracing. 55 years of grief finally acknowledged. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty. Howard Brackenridge collapsed into his chair. At 81, he would die in prison. The Brackenridge empire, built on the bones of 31 men, was finally falling. But Jake wasn't watching Howard. He was looking at a young woman in the back of the courtroom, taking notes. She wore a press badge, but there was something familiar about her face. She approached him after. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Sarah Sullivan. My great-uncle was Jimmy Sullivan, the 19-year-old. Jake's throat tightened. Jimmy, who'd survived almost a month tapping until the very end. I wanted to thank you, she said, for finding them, for making sure everyone knows he didn't abandon his mother. That was his biggest fear, that she'd think he just left. He tried to climb out, Jake said, the ventilation shaft. He was small enough to fit. If they hadn't capped it, he would have saved them all. Sarah finished. He would have gotten out and told everyone. That's why they had to seal it. That night, Jake stood at the reopened mine entrance. Tomorrow, they would seal it again properly, this time with glass walls so visitors could see where 31 men had spent their final days. But tonight, it was just him and the darkness. He thought about Carl Mitchell riding in absolute darkness, maintaining dignity while surrounded by death. About Jimmy Sullivan tapping SOS for weeks after everyone else was gone. About all of them choosing truth over life. "We did it, Grandpa," he said to the darkness. 55 years late, but we did it. Everyone knows your names. Everyone knows what happened. You can rest now." The wind through the mine shaft sounded almost like voices, like 31 men saying thank you, like Carl Mitchell finally putting down his pencil, finally stopping his endless tapping, finally able to rest. Tomorrow they would be buried as heroes. But tonight, in the darkness where they died, their truth was finally free. The funeral stretched across the entire Hazelton cemetery. 31 coffins draped in American flags, arranged in the same formation the men had died in, shoulder to shoulder. Carl Mitchell at the front, Jimmy Sullivan slightly apart. The president had sent representatives. The governor spoke. But it was Dennis Mitchell who delivered the words that mattered. "My father died on Christmas Day 1950, he said, voice steady despite his tears. Alone in the dark, surrounded by his dead brothers, still writing love letters to my mother, still thinking about my Christmas present. I never knew him. But through his words, through his insistence on documenting truth, I know him now. We all do." Jake stood with the other pallbearers as they lowered Carl Mitchell into the ground. The headstone was new black granite with gold letters. Carl Mitchell, 1915 to 1950. Foreman, father, truth teller. Someone must witness. Someone must record. The other 30 headstones bore similar inscriptions, not just names and dates, but who they were. Roy Henderson, Coach Little League. Frank Morrison, twin daughters' devoted father. Jimmy Sullivan, tapped SOS until the end. As the burial concluded, Howard Brackenridge was being led to federal prison. Brackenridge Industries had declared bankruptcy within hours of the verdict. The company built on murder was finally dead. But there was one more thing. Grace Sterling approached the microphone. "My father, Robert Sterling, was the chief engineer. He participated in this crime, though it destroyed him. His ashes will be scattered here among the men he failed to save. But first, I want to read his final testament written the day before he died." She unfolded a yellowed paper. "I helped murder 31 men. I heard their voices and did nothing. I deserve no forgiveness, but their families permitted. Let my ashes mix with the soil above them. Let me spend eternity apologizing. Let me be remembered not as a good man, but as a warning that ordinary people can become monsters when they choose comfort over conscience." The families voted. Robert Sterling's ashes would be scattered. He'd spend eternity among the men he betrayed, neither forgiven nor forgotten. As the crowd dispersed, Jake walked to the new memorial. Not the lies Brackenridge had built, but the truth. A black wall containing complete text of Carl Mitchell's final notes. Every word he'd written in the dark. Above it, in letters 3 feet tall, they died speaking truth. The old mine entrance had been transformed. The glass wall they'd installed allowed visitors to peer into Section 7. The lunch pails were still there, arranged in their circle. The names scratched into stone were lit by soft lights. A plaque explained everything. The illegal mining to cover up, the 47 hours of calls for help. School groups would come here and learn that 31 men chose truth over life, that ordinary people could be heroes, that power without conscience was murder. Jake's phone rang. It was the FBI agent who'd handled the case. "Thought you should know," she said. "We've opened 17 other cold cases related to mining deaths in the 1940s and 50s. Similar patterns. Your work here," it started something. After she hung up, Jake stood looking at the mountains surrounding Hazelton. How many more Carl Mitchells were out there? How many more covered-up murders bought silence and buried truth? "We're not done," he said to Dennis, who'd come to stand beside him. "No," his father agreed. "Carl wouldn't want us to be done." That night, in the Mitchell home, 3 generations gathered. Dennis had retrieved the rocking horse from McJurray's barn, restored it, and given it to his own grandson, Jake's nephew, named Carl. "Tell him the story when he's older," Dennis said. "Tell him about the man he's named for. Tell him that integrity matters more than survival, that truth matters more than comfort." Jake pulled out the lunch pail. They kept Carl Mitchell's with his final note still inside. It would go to a museum eventually, but for tonight it sat on their kitchen table. A reminder that even in absolute darkness, even facing certain death. A good man had thought his family, documented truth, and insisted on dignity. The doorbell rang. Jake opened it to find an elderly woman with a walker. "I'm Helen Morrison," she said, "Frank's widow. I wanted to thank you and to give you this." She handed him a photograph. It was taken on December 13th, 1950, one day before the disaster. The entire night shift crew standing at the mine entrance, Carl Mitchell in the center, everyone smiling. Frank took it. She said, "Brought it home to show me his friends." It's the last photo of them alive and free. Jake studied the faces. Young men, middle-aged men, one boy barely 19. They looked happy, normal, unaware that in 24 hours they begin dying by inches in the dark. "We'll make copies," Jake said. "Every family should have one." Helen Morrison smiled through her tears. "They saved others, you know," she said. After the news broke, 3 other mining companies admitted to illegal operations and shut them down before anyone got hurt. Your grandfather and the others, their deaths weren't meaningless. After she left, Jake stood on the porch looking toward the mountains where the mine lay. Somewhere beneath tons of rock and concrete, Section 7 remained, a tomb, a testament, a truth that couldn't be buried. The wind carried a sound that might have been imagination. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. But also we existed. We mattered. We were brave. 31 men who refused to disappear. And now they never would. If this story moved you, please subscribe, and share so these men's names and their truth are never forgotten. Leave a comment to tell us which part hit you hardest. And if you want, I can format the entire corrected script into a downloadable Word or plain text file for voiceover or upload.